Hi everyone, welcome to Julie Reads Her Bookshelf. I'm Julie, and for those of you who are new to the channel, this is a channel where I read through all of the unread books on my bookshelf until we reach 0. And today I come to you with a continuation of my bookshelf tour that I started last year. I sort of started this last year talking about what books are on my bookshelf. And since then, I've sort of started procrastinating from actually continuing my bookshelf tour. And part of the reason is actually that because I'm not buying new books, I see no real urgency with this exercise because my bookshelf never changes from month to month. But of course, I know that. You guys don't know that. So I do want to continue on with this bookshelf tour, especially because I have very particular requirements these days for buying books, but also for collecting books. I'm not really much of a collector in the sense of kind of rare and antique books, but I have quite strong preferences for what kind of editions I like. And today I want to talk to you about one of my favorite editions, which is the Reader's Digest World's Best Reading series. So I've mentioned these books previously, and a couple of people have said, oh, you shouldn't read digested versions. So I do want to make it clear, the Reader's Digest World's Best Reading series is actually not a digested version. They're full versions of classical books, but they were a series that was published by Reader's Digest, and my research tells me that they started in 1982. They were done by mail order, so you'd place your mail order and you'd get sent one of these books like bi-monthly or monthly, and in total there was 154 books that were part of this series. I only have 6 of them, but they are by far my favorite edition of vintage classic hardbacks to collect. So whenever I do see them in bookshelves, I like to grab them. And I mean, that's part of the problem of how I ended up with this problem of so many unread books. But actually, when it comes to these particular editions, my track record isn't too bad. Now, the reason why I really like these books is that they are just wonderfully printed. They're not leather bound, they are kind of cardboard, but they're just very solid books. The paper quality is excellent. It's quite thick paper. There's usually illustrations in it. I'll see if I can find one. So some of them you get kind of these more monochromatic illustrations. Some of them are more colored, but there's always some kind of illustrations. A lot of them come with kind of very interesting like end paper type things. And they're just kind of wonderful objects to own. And I particularly have a fondness for well-bound hardbacks that kind of lay quite flat as I'm reading. And these are quite nice as well. And the other thing is for those people who might be getting a bit on where you prefer a larger print. The print size is not large print, but they're actually quite reasonable compared to your Penguins, which are much smaller prints. So they're really comfortable to read as well. And the other feature with these books is that they come with a little insert. So they don't normally have an introduction in the way that you might with your kind of Penguins and Oxfords, where it's clearly more meant for a school or a university course. And so they come with a lot of kind of reading materials and notes in addition to the book itself. These, because they were a mail order and they're really just meant for kind of leisurely consumption, they don't necessarily have the same academic text or notes that accompany the book, but they do have a little insert that you get with every book. And if you get them vintage and secondhand, some of them will still have their own kind of initial insert, and that basically goes through the background, tells you a little bit about the author, tells you a little bit about when the book was written in the author's life. So it's quite useful to have this little insert, and if I can find it, I normally keep it in there and use it as a bookmark as I'm reading as well. So even though I don't have a lot of these books, I'm always on the lookout for them, because whenever I get a book that I think is a keeper on my bookshelf, then I try and upgrade the edition that I have to the ideal edition. And there's a couple of kind of publishers that I consider to be my ideal editions. And so if I see, for example, Edith Wharton, an Edith Wharton book in the Reader's Digest version in the secondhand bookstore or at some kind of charity sale, then I will pick it up and I'll just upgrade the edition to the edition that I want to keep. So that's why I really like these editions. They're great. They look fabulous on your bookshelf. They look really good together as well, like if you had like a row of them together. And for completely superficial reasons, I really, really love these editions, and I always try and collect my favorite books in these editions. So it's a work in progress, but let me just quickly go through the 6 that I have. 4 of them I have read. So first we have A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This is the book, the version that I read last year when I was doing my year of reading Victorians. And it's actually not a bad book. I'm not a huge fan of Charles Dickens, as I've previously explained on this channel, but I also haven't really given him a proper chance. I did enjoy this book. The ending made quite an impression on me, but it was also, you kind of see it coming from the beginning. So it's good, but it's not excellent. I do love this edition, and I also think that this is a keeper on my bookshelf until I've really given Dickens a proper chance. I'm going to keep this one. Another one that I read last year, I really made some inroads with these editions last year because I ended up reading 2 out of the 6 that I own. And this is Silas Marner by George Eliot. And this was the second George Eliot book that I read last year. The first, of course, being Middlemarch. And look, Silas Marner does not compare to Middlemarch. Nothing really compares to Middlemarch. But this is actually quite good. I enjoyed, well, first of all, it's quite enjoyable as a smaller Victorian novel. But also I really enjoyed kind of the slightly folksy, mythical quality to it. There's a kind of, it's quite moralistic, but it doesn't at the same time feel overly preachy. And I think that's just goes to show George Eliot's general brilliance. But it is, of course, not at the same level as Middlemarch. The third book I have, actually I lied, I read through 3 of these last year. It's quite a good year. But this is Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. This is one of the 2 Thomas Hardy books I read last year. Thomas Hardy is a hard one because he's quite depressing, but he also does some things well enough for you to keep reading him. Like, his characters are generally really compelling. I did not like this one as much as I liked Jude, Jude the Obscure. I thought Jude was actually kind of much better, although the ending was hysterically sad, like unbelievably sad. So unbelievable, in fact, that it actually detracts from your enjoyment of the book. And same with this one. I'm not totally sure that I bought into the romance between Tess and Angel. And yeah, I have mixed feelings about Thomas Hardy. Again, it's one of those things where if I haven't given an author a proper chance, I tend to keep their books and sort of leave open the door to reevaluating them in the future. And that's what I'm doing with Thomas Hardy in a way. I do still have to read Far from the Madding Crowd. So potentially he might change my mind there. I should also say I have quite a few anthologies of poetry with Hardy in it. And he's actually quite prolific a poet, which I hadn't really appreciated until more recently when I was reading through some of these poems, and I'm thinking, I didn't know Thomas Hardy as a poet. The 4th book out of the ones that I read is Emma by Jane Austen. And I've mentioned this previously, but Emma is my favorite Austen book. Look, I know the character Emma is quite annoying, but she's supposed to be. I don't really understand why people hold it against a particular book because they don't like one of the characters or the main characters in the book. if they're supposed to be, if it's part of the author's intention that these characters come very flawed and a little bit annoying, then the author's obviously achieving her aim by by conveying that across to you as a reader. And I think Jane Austen intended for Emma to be this highly flawed, slightly arrogant character. That's what makes the ending work. So I really like Emma. It's my favorite of the Austens, and so this is definitely a keeper for me. On to the two that I haven't read. The first one is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Now, this was my reward buy for reading through 20 of the books on my unread shelf last year. So for those of you who are new to this channel, one of the exceptions to my book buying ban that I have in place until I've finished off all my unread books is that for every 20 books I read, I'm allowed to buy myself a book. So last year, after I'd read 20 books and I'd gone from 90 unread books to 70 unread books, I was in a bookshelf and I saw this there, and it was in my favorite edition. So I'd always intended to read Moby Dick. I understand it's about a whale. So I thought, look, let's buy it. I don't know that I'll necessarily get it in my favorite edition again. This was in perfect condition. Honestly, I don't think whoever owned this had previously read it. But it didn't come with its little synopsis. It did come, of course, with these fabulous illustrations. So I'm very, very happy that I got this one. It is pretty high on the list of books to read this year, although the list of books to read this year is starting to look more and more daunting. So maybe I won't get around to it. I'll try my best with this one. And the final book I have in this series, which I haven't read, is Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Now, I've not read anything by John Steinbeck. Having grown up in Australia, I received quite an Anglo-centric education. So actually my reading of classical American fiction is quite limited. So I really wanted to give Steinbeck a go. I have to say I bought this book at a time in my life where I was buying books slightly indiscriminately. And so I can't say that I put too much critical thinking into choosing this one. But it is a very well-known work of American literature, and I do want to at least try some Steinbeck before I make up my mind about him. And since I've never read anything by him, I've kept this book on my bookshelf as sort of my representative Steinbeck. So I will at some point read this. It's not very high up on my kind of list of priorities because obviously this year I'm focusing more on the French part of my bookshelf and trying to knock off a few books there. So we'll see if I get around to this one. I suspect I'll get around to Moby Dick before I get around to this. So there you have it, my favorite edition of hardback classics to get. Unfortunately, they're not in publication anymore, but I bet some of you do have some copies because I do see them regularly in circulation. So what do you think about them? Are they editions that you like? Are they editions that you collect? And if you do have your favorite edition of classics to collect, what are those? I'd be keen to hear about them. So I will try and continue my bookshelf tour and probably do it publisher by publisher because, as I said, I have kind of very specific preferences for certain editions of books. And I think it's always, I'm personally always curious to see what's on other people's bookshelves and what editions they like as well. So we'll see where we go next after this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon.